Hi, my inspiration for you today has to do with a quote from Henry Ford. Henry Ford says, and I'll read it to you. It says, "One of the greatest discoveries a man makes, one of his great surprises, is to find he can do what he was afraid he couldn't do." And I find that quote to be true, what Henry Ford said back when, because I have myself discovered that and have been surprised that I could do what I thought that I couldn't do. And that brings me to the topic tonight or today of the speaking, writing a book, and speaking. And as I go through this tonight, share this with you, I just want you to know that if you're going to write a book, at some point in time, you will definitely be speaking. And so just keep that in mind, just in case you are feeling that that this is not something that you want to do, because that was my story. Hi, welcome to Clayton Communications and Publishing. And this is our Facebook online newsletter. And I am Coach Blondie, and I will be walking with you today through some what I think is important, and that is you learning how to share your book or to promote your book by speaking. I remember when I was a child that I was very shy, and of course, when the word came that I was going to write a book, I was like, well, I didn't at first at 10 years old, I didn't think about it. But later on, when the word came a second time that I was going to write a book, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. And so I was afraid, and I've always been fearful as a child growing up and even in adulthood, but I tried to not let on my fears. What I often did is I would feel the fear, but I would always do whatever it is that I needed to do anyway. And I've learned a lot since childhood, and I've learned a lot since adulthood about being afraid to speak and how to be able to overcome that. And so, what I'm going to share with you today is has something to do with how I can overcome it, and also give you some tips on why you're afraid. And once you take those, you conquer those things. Of course, then it makes it a lot easier. My book writing journey started, it didn't start because I, like most of you probably, most of you probably desire to write a book. That's been what you wanted to do, or you started one, and it was just sitting on the shelf collecting dust. Well, that was not Blondie. Blondie would had no desire, and I remember at 10 years old when I was really wanting to die, and I heard this voice that says, because I wanted those bad memories, those traumas to be taken away. And I heard this voice that says, I'm leaving it there because you're going to write about it one day. And I never thought any more about writing. And writing was not something that I sought to do in school. Like I've met many who they've been writing since a very young age. And I never desired to write. But apparently, God had a different plan. And of course, that's why I have ended up where I've ended up. So let's talk about speaking to promote your book. Authors speak about their books at some time or another. And so if you're writing a book, you are going to end up speaking about it one way or another. And so you need to prepare yourself. Just because you're a first time author does not mean that you can't be professional about it. And I would suggest that you work on that. And so, if you write a book at some point, you will have to speak. That's inevitable. Now, you can hire a marketing company and they can do all that for you, but at some point, somebody's going to contact you and say, "Hey, we'd like for you to come and speak." And so, at that point, now you got to figure out, well, how am I going to do it, or what am I going to talk about, et cetera, et cetera. So, what I'm going to share with you today is to help you to be prepared if you have stepped into that arena of being a first time author. I remember when I wrote my first book, I was all ready to go to print. I was excited that I had finished it. I fought it all the way through. I dragged it out for as long as I could drag it out. How about 5 years? I dragged it out because my story was just so painful. So as I was getting closer to actually getting it printed, I'm thinking, I'm going to have to speak. Hold up, I'm not ready to speak in public. And of course, anxiety set in. But since it was God's plan, I just knew to go to pray. And I started praying and I said, Lord, I said, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to be public. I just want to be, hide out like I've always hidden out. Please help me with my fears. I'm struggling and so forth. And I don't know, most of you may know, but when you pray and you ask God and you're on his assignment and you've been predestined for something, doors are just going to open. And so the idea came that I should just look in the phone book at the time and see what what speaker training was available in my community. And I found out there was a Toastmasters. I had never heard of Toastmasters before. And so I got the address, called up, asked when their meetings was, started attending their meetings, hung in there with them for a while. But in spite of my fear, I attended the meeting scared. And it was just it seemed so formal to me at the time. And after a while, it just didn't feel right. I didn't feel like I felt uncomfortable in my delivery. I felt like I was being scrutinized and that kind of thing. And so ultimately, I abandoned that plan. And then one day, I was in a neighborhood that wasn't even my own neighborhood, and I was doing something. I was sending a letter off at the post office, and I look over there on the table, and there's a flyer there, and I'm thinking, okay, I look at the flyer, and I see that the flyer is talking about speaker training or train to be a speaker. And I'm thinking, how strange that this one lone flyer is sitting here and I just happen to be here. And of course, I'm looking for some training. And if you know anything about the government, you don't post anything, you don't put anything in there, flyers, business cards, or any of that, because that would be totally, probably a jailable offense. And so I looked at it and I said, well, okay, I'm going to just go ahead on and call. And I called and I found out that they have meetings on Saturdays once a month. And so I scheduled myself to go and I did that training for about 4 years. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved the energy of the people. Some of them were like me. They had published a book or wanted to publish a book. And it was just exciting. And it was run by a lady named Tina Dupree and they called her the chicken lady, and I'm not sure now why they called her the chicken lady. I think she used to be in marketing for a chicken company. And as I began to perfect my speaking skills, she gave me the opportunity to actually lead the group and lead the sessions from week to week, from month to month. And this really helped to catapult me into greater confidence and just the idea of I no longer had the same issues that I had. The shyness had disappeared. I was still kind of shy, but at least now I was armed and ready to step out and do what I needed to do. And it was there that I learned how to speak and promote my book. I learned how to open a talk. I learned how to structure a speech and how to deliver. I mean, these are all things that would be fearful if you did not know how to do them. And that's where part of my fear was coming from, not to mention some other childhood things that took place that caused me to end up having that fear. But I won't talk about that now. But one of the first questions that you're going to find that people are going to ask you, they're going to say, "Well, what is your book about?" And I remember those days. I mean, yeah, and I would come up with something, but I began to recognize after attending, being in the speaking class, I said, "I've got to get some," because she taught about a 30-second commercial, and I said, "I've got to get something," and I started to put together something, and that is where I learned how to be able to rapid fire what your book was about and perfect that. And it worked. I mean, you were able to not feel stupid when somebody asks you, what is your book about? And you're just fumbling through chapter 1 through 10, trying to, in a scattered way, to tell them what your book is about. And I learned how to create a benefit driven uh, 30 seconds, a 30 seconds response with benefit driven. I don't think I learned the benefit driven part from her, but the 30-second commercial, I did learn how to structure. And then as a book publisher, I learned how to make my 30 seconds more benefit driven. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a 30-second response or commercial from my own first book. And the name of the book is Abuse, the Results, the Plan, and the Victory. So now, what is my book about? Growing up traumatic, feeling hopeless, confused, and afraid. Your past does not have to define you, that there is a greater plan in operation. And so I learned how to deliver that message. Because why? What do you hear in the message? You hear that it's about trauma, it's about feeling hopeless, it's about confused and being afraid, and then realizing that you're not defined by your past and that there is a greater plan, and that's God's plan for your life. And so that would tend to draw interest in people. Well, where can I buy your book? And then, of course, you will always want to be ready with your own business card with your book and your information on it to hand them. And I'll tell you, when you first start to do it, it can be very challenging because you've never done it before. It was challenging to me when I did it, but I was determined to do it. And I can do it much quicker today because of the fact that I have done so many and helped so many authors, first time authors, to do it. So if you suggest to someone that you wrote a book, and then they are going to ask you, well, what is your book about? And you want to be able to do it in a concise way, not fumbling and grumbling. I mean, not hemming and hawing, but you want to be able to do it as quickly as possible. But you want to make sure that you're dangling in front of them those possible words that may cause them to have a deeper interest. So again, be prepared to have that business card ready. And next, I would look at my subtitles in my book and I would pick a topic and my topic that I have chosen, and I would develop this topic. You always want to be intentional. You're taking an excerpt from your book to create a talk. So that means that while you're talking, you could say, and this excerpt and what I'm sharing with you came from my book. And that way you're kind of drawing them in and you are continuing to show them or to dangle in front of them what that the contents of your book and what your book is about by way of singling out this talk. But by that now, and that's what I mean by intentional. And learn how to talk about it, about what the book contains that can help others to improve their lives. And you can because people buy books because they want to do something. They want to enjoy something. They want to improve something. They want to maybe correct something or heal in some emotions or something. And so keep that in mind when you are wanting to talk about your book. And the topic or the chapter that I chose for you to walk you through is called Let's Face It in my book. And the chapter is about healing the present by revisiting the past. And my talk would open with questions. I would, depending upon the size of the audience, I would just ask questions. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get them to share with me some of their let's face it moments. So, and so as I would elicit these things from them to get them involved, and then once I got them involved or engaged, then I would talk to them about healing the past woundedness. And I would ask them to share how their let's face it moment worked out for them. And see, I'm gathering all this information because I want to be able to use that information as I begin to transition into my story and also begin to bring it to a close and using some of what they have shared. So what lessons they learned, I would ask that question because if they've had a let's face it moment, there's some things that they learn. And so the things that they learn, I may use those as to share with them, okay, here's what you learned, and now here's what I learned as a result of my experience. And notice, I don't just want to talk at them. I want to talk, I want to engage them. I want them to think. I want to pull them over onto my side so that when I'm ready to talk about what I'm there for, and when I'm ready to talk about my topic or get deeper into my topic, that they're already with me. They're already walking with me. And then I would begin to use what lessons that they have learned to transition into my story. I would proceed to share the details from my chapter 1 in the book, and I would tell them that I had to face what I had to face and tell them how I gained the power to face it because they've already shared with me some of their experiences and how they were able to overcome. And what came out of my sharing, I would then go into encouraging them to face it no matter what their it is. And so that would be, so I wouldn't exactly, if I was doing chapter one as a talk, let's face it, I wouldn't exactly give them just the word for word detail. I would kind of try to mix it up a little bit so that it can be relatable to them, but yet it's still letting them see that my transparency through sharing my story and what happened to me and how I was able to overcome it. And then I would close it out with what came out of the overall discussions, what all that they said mixed with what I wanted to share from my own life. So what have you learned so far? Well, you learned to speak to promote your book. You learn the fear of speaking can hold you back, and prayer can help you overcome. Your online platform still needs you to promote your book by speaking. Yes, and you can hire someone to market your book, but sooner or later you will have to or you will be called upon to speak. You learn that you can be trained out of your speaking fear because I shared a little bit with you how I walk through it. I'm going to share a little bit more with you and how to create a 30-second benefit response to inquiries about what your book is about. And then how to create a talk, a discussion around your book subtitles. As I prepare to close, in over 25 years that I've worked with authors, I find that they come in and they want to do a book, and I definitely always want to encourage them to do that. And they get over their fears because I walk them through somewhat of what I've shared with you here and how to help them to get over. I also learned and want to share with you what I learned about my shyness and my fear of speaking was that I didn't know technique. I didn't know how a speech was set up. I didn't know how you deliver a speech. And of course, when you deliver a speech, you always have people staring at you. And of course, that comes from a childhood thing that happened when I was growing up. And I think I shared that on one of the other videos. So if that is your case, then take a speaking class. Don't be afraid. If you really are committed to your message, take that speaking class. Learn the technique. Get comfortable and I ended up with Toastmasters first, and then I ended up with what was known as the Professional Speakers Network with Dr. Tina Dupree. And the the it, the reason I was afraid, and most people may be afraid, is because it's an unknown. You don't know how to set up a speech. You don't know how to deliver a speech. So there would be some fear. But once you learn the techniques, it's not as fearful as you might have thought it to be. So speakers starting out, I want you to know, in spite of, and there are different schools of thoughts on this, I work with notes. And I work with notes so it keeps me on track. And so don't be afraid to start out using notes. You won't need notes forever. At least you won't need certain format of notes forever. After a while, you'll be able to work with outlines and still stay on track. So, and you can practice. And there's nothing wrong with practice. I practice before I would, get when I started out, it was a lot of practice because when we would come on Saturdays, whoever you might be called on at any moment to present. So I practiced, and I probably was one of few that did at times. So why do you practice? You practice so that you can get more comfortable in delivery and to eliminate words like and words like if that's a constant habit for you. So that's the reason that you practice. And the way I practice back then, I don't do it today. The way I practiced back then is I would cut out pictures from magazine, pictures of faces of people, since that was one of my fears from childhood. I cut out pictures and I would paste them on the wall. And I went out and bought a music stand so I could place my notes on it, so I could actually pretend like I was standing before an audience. And that worked for me. And it helped to make me more comfortable. And of course, when I was in the Saturday classes, then I got even more comfortable. I don't read my notes. I use them to, as I said earlier, to keep me on track. Reading is not speaking. I did these things to get comfortable sharing outwardly because I was such an introvert and just so shy all of my life. But I always, like I said, I felt the fear and did it anyway. You can also use talk notes or slides if you choose to, and it's whatever makes you comfortable. I mean, some recommend that you watch other speakers, and nothing wrong with that. You can do that, but you have to develop your own style and not. I usually can tell when a speaker is trained by someone that is famous or well known. You kind of hear that in that speaker, but you need to be you. Okay, if you have a southern drawl, then that's your southern drawl. That's uniquely you. If you have a New York accent, that's uniquely you. Whatever it is, I mean, it could be a British accent or whatever. Just be uniquely you because that is what people want. They want to see you as you, authentic you, rather than just somebody standing up there just pretending to be and not really connecting with them. I pray that this information has been useful to you on your journey. And remember, if you're going to write, you definitely will have to speak at some time. And if you need help creating your talk topics or uh, maybe something that I've said here that you would like to chat with me a little bit more, you can do so by emailing me at coach23blondie at gmail.com. And if this information has, and I hope that it and pray that it has been beneficial to you, then share it with friends and family. And until next time, Coach Blondie signing off.